Okay, so we're going to go ahead and load 30 cases. This is actually the first step of the true reloading process. I'm going to do 30 because I have 3 of these stripper clips that are empty and I want to fill them back up with rounds. So each stripper clip holds 10 rounds, so I'll do 30 of them. There's 2 different types here. This has a black insert in it. It's actually a type of mild steel. But these aren't really very good. I don't recommend buying these things because these little black tips, a couple times of bending them back and forth to hold the cases in and then let them come out, or the cartridges in and out, they'll crack right off. In fact, this one already has 1 clip off of it. These other ones are actually older. They're a little bit harder to find. They have a brass insert inside of it, and this soft brass bends back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, no problem. I think eventually it'll probably break, but these are so much better than these kind right here. So if you're looking for stripper clips, get the kind with the brass insert inside of it. Cheaper Than Dirt sells these. It's one of the few places that still sell them. Definitely worth any little bit of extra money on those things. So anyway, we have 30 cases over here that have completely been prepared. We just finished that in the last video. And now it's time to deal with the primers, which is the first step of the actual reloading process. So on these 5.56, 223, I'm loading 7.5 small rifle bench rest primers. These are Remington 7.5s. Lots of different name brands of small rifle primers for the 5.56. That's the size it takes, a small rifle. CCIs are great. I love CCIs. I just don't happen to be using CCIs for this load. Winchesters are good. I've had luck with a lot of different primer types. Important note here is to be consistent. If you're using, if you work up a load with 7.5 Remingtons, then let's stay with 7.5 Remingtons. If you change it dramatically, then you probably got to work that load back up, starting at 10% below the minimum, or below the maximum, and then working it up from there to make sure it's safe in your rifle. So I've been loading these 7.5s for quite some time. Here's my RCBS primer tray, and these are cool little things. If you look at this, they have these concentric circles all inside here. A little bit of a raised surface, and that's important. I'll show you how that works here in a little bit. So anyways, I'm going to dispense 30 primers. So there we go. I can see it. I turn it upside down. 10. You hear them fall. 20. 30. Leave it right there. You don't dispense more. I try to handle my primers as little as possible. So now notice that they're not all anvil up. The sides are not anvil up. That's what these little grooves are for. If we just shake it a little bit, what happens is the lip of the primer catches on those grooves and forces it to flip over. It's good now. Now what I'm going to do is close these up for a minute so they stay there just in case I bump them. And I'm going to prepare my the press for the what's called the RAM priming unit. So this just seats in here like any other die, like a die would. Okay, now here's my shell holder. I'm going to pop this here, turn it so I can feed the cases in easily, and insert this on the RAM body itself. And lastly, this is the piece that actually holds the primer. The primer sits in this little cup right here, and as it raises up and strikes the this part here will strike the head of the case and then compress and actually push the primer inside the primer pocket. That's a nice design. I really like this because it is extremely consistent. I'm going to raise this handle, or lower the handle and raise the RAM, and that's as far as it goes. That is it. and so every time I insert a primer, they are inserted to the same depth as the previous one and the one before it and the one after it. They'll all be the same. And the depth at which you seat the primer is also important to make sure that you have very consistent ignition of the powder inside the case body itself. That's why we spent so much time working on these primer pockets, and in some cases, as I mentioned, I will make sure that the flash hole has also been uniformed. I don't usually do that on these 5.56s. I've never done it on the 5.56s, but on the more of the target long range type of rounds like my 220 Swift and 243 Winchester, I take a lot more time and make sure that the flash holes are uniform as well. So that's how this little thing works anyway. Now we raise the ram by lowering the handle, and I drop that in, and now it's in there. See? I just like to look at it. I kind of depress it, and I see, want to make sure that it's not going to insert those things too deeply. It looks like it's in good shape. I have a couple of these rams, and they've been set for a couple different calibers, and you kind of have to putz with these things because to set them for an individual cartridge, and the make of that case, because the depth of the primer pockets, in some cases, if you don't prep them real good, they'll be different, and you won't get real good consistency on the depth at which those primers are set into the primer pockets. So I've just gone ahead. This thing is ready to go now, and we'll be putting primers into these, and I'll show you that process. But one other step that I always do in between here, once I get everything set up, is I'm going to stop, and I'm going to go back inside, and I'm going to wash my hands real good with some good soap, and I want to get all the oils and greases off of it that I might have just put on from handling all this stuff. That is one thing that will kill primers, is oil. Any sort of oil, WD-40 or even gun oil, will destroy primers, and that is it. That's the death knell for a primer. So before I actually physically handle these primers and do this whole process, I'm going to make sure that my hands are absolutely clean. Okay. All right, we'll get to it here. We can see those primers, anvil side up, ready to go. Kind of can inspect those anvils. They all look very uniform to me. So if we're going to take one of these cases, I always like to look at the base here to make sure that it looks good, and I didn't forget to do a step or something like that. It's just good practice, I think, good habit to get into. We place that primer here in that little cup. Again, of course, anvil side up. Lay this in here, and that's it. That's the process. Lift it back up a little bit, pull it out. I'll have to check this. I physically check it with my finger, and we want to make sure that there's a slight recess. It's actually recessed inside or below the head here, and that is because when that bolt closes up on it, we want it to make firm contact with the head, but we don't want it actually contacting the primer itself. And if that firing pin moves forward, especially in a semi-automatic, I guess there's a potential that it could fire off when you're just seating the cartridge into the chamber. Anyway, it's just very, very good practice to make sure you have a slight recess in that primer, and this one does. It's just about, I would say this is about perfect. If I can get them all like that, I'll be very happy. So we then lower that handle again, place the primer, anvil side up, just raise it a little bit just to drop it below the level here. You don't have to, completely move this handle all the time and change the ram. It goes in, just like that, and that's it. Beautiful. Again, this is a very nice. This one seems to be recessed a little bit more than the previous one. A different name brand, maybe? Yeah, these are different name brands of cases, so they'll be a little bit different. Place that there. Now, if you feel any hard resistance when you're putting this primer in, you probably want to stop. This one feels excellent. And the reason for that is, especially on these 5.56s, is you may not have completely removed that military crimp from the primer. And what you'll end up doing is mangling up that primer, and I guess it's possible you could discharge the primer, get it to fire off inside here, and that's not good. So if you have real hard resistance when you're priming, stop. This is just my fingers. I'm pushing this thing, and it's coming along very nicely. I just finished all 30 of these, priming them, and things went pretty well. Now, earlier I said if you have during the priming phase, if you have a primer that seems to have some resistance to being, seated in the case, to stop right away. And sometimes when you do stop, unfortunately, what has happened is that primer is, 3/4 of the way in or 2/3 of the way in, and that's just how it is. The thing is going to sit there. You can't fire it because the primer is not good. It doesn't have a good seating, and it maybe not even seated all the way. You don't dare seat it all the way because you might crush the primer. So what do you do then? You've got this case that has a live primer stuck inside of it. So what you got to do is you got to kill the primer, and then you're going to throw the thing away. The best way to kill the primer is just to take a nice little zap of WD-40, put the red straw inside there, hit it with WD-40. That primer is now dead, and you can throw it in the trash, and there's no harm that will be done with it.